Good afternoon, ladies and gents. It's the 7th of July, 2025, and it is the 20th anniversary, or 20 years ago today, of the 7/7 terrorist attacks in London back in 2005. So, the topic of conversation is terrorism, amongst a couple of other things. But before I kick this off, just a quick notification. Next week, on Monday, the 14th of July, 2025, I'm going to be doing another dry fast. So, a dry fast, for anyone who's unsure, it's basically not eating any food nor drinking any water or any other fluids. So no intake at all. The last time I'd done this, I've done a video on the experience. It was done over, or it was done for, what was it, 72 hours. So no food or water for 3 days. However, although it was a test, when I'd done it, I don't think it didn't test me. It didn't test my personal boundaries, or it wasn't kind of what I was looking for. What I wanted to be experiencing more, and I didn't in those 3 days. So this time I'm going to be doing it for 5 days, which is 120 hours. And the purpose of this exercise is so that I can understand what it's like for my body to be without any food, certainly for 5 days, and no fluids at all. So the fluids will be the test on day 4 and 5. That's where my body should sort of go into survival mode and start, I suppose, coming to terms with dehydration. Like the 3 day test, I will do a video and share my experience. It's okay me sort of being sat here advising you guys, that you need to make sure that you've got this water and enough, for a given period of time. If myself, I don't understand what it feels like to actually be without water. Now, I'm not suggesting you guys should go off and do this. If you fast or you're familiar with fasting, then you'll understand what it is. But for me to truly sort of appreciate those things that we do take for sort of granted on a daily basis. Sometimes they need to be taken away from us just to teach us, some kind of lesson. So that's why I'm doing it. I just want to test myself, my boundaries, both my physical and psychological boundaries, and just see how I kind of deal with that. Secondly, my motto for this channel is to be military fit and infantry aware, and I just want to do a short video. I'll do it next week if I feel up to it with no food and water. But I'll do a short video. I'll try and get one done this week actually on what that actually means, as in being military fit and infantry aware, because it might be a little bit misleading. And I'll just give you an overview of what I do, to be adopting those skills, because it might be sort of just misleading for some. Anyway, let's move on with this. Guys, I'm just going to be surfing the internet. We're not going to be doing the slides. I'm going to throw up some sort of articles, and that's pretty much it. But I just want to crack on with this. Let's just bring this up. Right. Okay. We're going to start off with. Okay. Let's get on with it. So UK terrorism threat levels. In the UK, that is, there's five. So we got low, moderate, substantial, severe, and critical. So the UK is currently at substantial, meaning an attack is likely, and the UK has been at this threat since let's just check, 2019, I believe. Let's have a quick look. It might say, it might not. Since 2019, but the UK over the last 20 years has been at all levels bar one, and that is low. So this level there, we've not been in that level at all. The critical status here, which is an attack, is highly likely in the near future. That came into play back in 2006, 2007, and 2017 with threats from international terrorism at that time. So the reason why I just want to talk about this today, and again, guys, just because I live in the UK, if you're living in other countries, these principles all, they'll still apply to you. Okay, so although we're talking about the UK, we're going to be talking about other countries in a minute anyway, so it doesn't matter. But the reason why I'm bringing this up now as a topic of importance is because of should we say, the conflict that's currently unfolding in the Middle East. Conflicts that, quite frankly, have been going on for years, and it's a breeding ground for trained terrorism and terrorists. Okay, the Middle East is. It doesn't matter what anyone wants to say about it. It is. Okay, that's it. But before anyone wants to suggest that certain groups are or aren't terrorists, I'm not going to get into that bollocks right now. But this is the interpretation of a terrorist, and it's down to you and I where we what or who should we say? Let's say who we want to be putting into this category. Yeah. So if we just let's just see what this is saying. Let's just come away from that for a minute. Let's just bang that in there. Right. Okay. So what is a terrorism? That doesn't sound right, does it? No. So what is terrorism? Sorry about this. Let's just get rid of that. Okay. So terrorism. Um, Most people have got their own sort of idea of what terrorism is or a terrorist or whatever it is. But a terrorist is someone who uses violence and threats, often against civilians, to instill fear and achieve political, religious, and ideological goals. They aim to influence governance, intimidate the public, or even disrupt society to, advance their cause. So terrorists employ acts of violence such as bombings, assassinations, or attacks on public spaces just to create a climate of fear. Political, religious, or ideological goals could be one or all or two of those, but the purpose of terrorism is not random violence, but rather a calculated means to, should we say, achieve specific sort of objectives related to political change or religious dominance or adherence to a particular ideology. Terrorists seek to influence governments, intimidate the public, or again, like I say, disrupt social order to achieve their aims. You've got what they call non-state actors. So whilst governments can also engage in violence, the term terrorist is generally used to describe individuals or groups that are not part of a state apparatus, sort of a apparatus. So that's kind of non-government, if that makes sense. Examples of this is going to be terrorist attacks that have targeted or they target civilians, government buildings, and other sort of critical infrastructure. Again, it depends on the terrorist organization. What is their cause? What's the motive? How big are they? Where are they located? And all the rest of it. Um, However, guys, we have to look at the other side of the fence also. Can a government, right? The reason why I'm going to say this next bit is because I've had conversations with people where they say, yeah, but the US are terrorists and the UK are terrorists and all the rest of it. So I just want to kind of, it's only fair to describe both sides of the fence, really. So the question that I've kind of been asked is, can a government be classed as a terrorist or can they be classed as terrorists, shall we say? So you have state-sponsored terrorism. So while the term state-sponsored terrorism exists, let me just see if we can bring that up. Let's just bang that in there. So what I'm going to do is just kind of rattle off and just babble on and that, but I'll put something up on the screen for you to read if you need to sort of read it. What was I saying? Yeah, so state-sponsored terrorism exists. It's more accurate to say that the government can support or enable terrorism rather than being directly labelled as terrorists themselves. But governments are sort of typically not classified as terrorist organisations. As a term, terrorism is generally sort of used to describe non-state actors. However, governments can be accused of sponsoring or enabling sort of terrorist acts by other countries or organisations. Let me give you a more detailed explanation. Terrorism is usually defined as I just said, the use of violence and intimidation in the pursuit of political aims, often targeting civilians. It's generally associated with non-state actors, like extremist groups or those kind of whether you want to call them militant groups or organizations, or whatever you want to sort of call those. But a state-sponsored terrorism, or terrorists, shall we say, whilst not directly labeled terrorists, some governments are accused of supporting and enabling terrorist organizations. So this can include providing funding, weapons, training, or sort of safe havens to terrorist groups. So the US Department of State that maintains a list of state-sponsored or sponsors of terrorism, sort of designated countries that it is, that have repeatedly provided support for acts of international terrorism and stuff like that. But remember, guys, this is the US Department of State, and that they do have a tendency to make up rules that suit themselves, really. Um, Designated state sponsors. So these could be countries like North Korea, Iran, Syria, and Cuba. They're currently designated as state sponsors of terrorism by the USA, according to the US Department of State. We've got prescribed organisations. So the UK government can prescribe or ban organisation it deems involved in terrorism or supporting. So a recent example of this is going to be Palestine Action, responsible for what did they do? They breached the Brize Norton US Air Force Base in Oxfordshire a week or so ago, causing, what was it, criminal damage to multiple aircraft with the red paint into the engines and stuff like that. So again, we've seen that court case go ahead, and we've seen protests off the back of that. But that's what I'm saying. Prescribed organisations. Key differences between state actors and non-state actors. So states have a monopoly on, let's say, a legitimate use of force within their boundaries. So that's within the country, whilst terrorist organizations are typically non-state actors. Governments, even those accused of supporting terrorism, still operate with a degree of legitimacy within the international system. Let's say, for instance, Iran, whilst terrorist organizations don't. In conclusion, whilst governments can engage in actions that support or enable terrorism, they're not typically classified as terrorist organizations in the same way as a non-state actor. So the term state-sponsored terrorism is used to describe the relationship between a government and terrorist groups. So a prime example of that is, like I say, Iran being a state sponsor for its regional proxies, such as Hamas, the Houthis, and Hezbollah. We hear a lot about how, let's say, for example, the US are terrorists due to the nature of some of the battles and wars conducted, and or their support for countries that are currently in conflict with others. So, for example, should we be classing Israel as terrorists for killing so many innocent individuals in Gaza? Again, that's open to debate and a sensitive subject, hence the reason why there are so many protests at the moment, and a lot of views on this subject. So there's accusations of genocide are being put forward, whilst Israel may say that all targets are legitimate. However, Hamas are using Palestinians as human shields, hiding amongst kids in schools and patients in hospitals. But either way, you know, there's always going to be fors and against for this argument. I'm not going to get into it. That's not what we're for. And there's plenty of there's plenty of channels out there discussing it and all sorts of stuff. So what we're seeing across the Middle East is how can I put it? It's a complex hierarchical sort of structure or web of complexity with state-sponsored attacks by proxy militants and or how can I put this? Yeah, state-sponsored attacks by proxy militants. When I'm saying this, I'm kind of referring to Iran, actually, to be honest with you. But this does apply to any or all. But they can, they can proxy with sort of neighboring countries. So let's say, for example, Iran sponsoring Hezbollah in Lebanon, or the Houthis in Yemen. So that's what I'm kind of trying to sort of say there. But look, guys, if I've lost you already, let me just sort of explain, because this is going to be important to what I'm about to sort of say. there's so much shit out there at the moment. Videos on channels where we're seeing a narrative being created and orchestrated as we speak today, yesterday, and it's been going on for a long time. There's channels that are creating a clear divide at the moment, and they're making out that the Islamic faith and or Islam are the enemy, when that's clearly not the case. However, to be fair to some, the narrow-minded people out there, those who follow mainstream, have no knowledge of history and just merely jumping on everyone else's sort of bandwagon, they're just being sucked into that. Okay, so this is part of the reason why I'm having this conversation. We're hearing, I mean, every time we see a video or other content saying let me get I won't bring them up. I don't want to bring up other people's content or YouTube content on this video recording, but there's things like the truth is coming about Palestine protesters no one's noticed, or Muslim crowds being silenced, or protests outside UK court as hearing on is it Palestine action, anyway, that kind of thing. And Britain has had enough of protest, and the list just goes on. um all of this news and sort of information is causing a divide at the moment. I'm starting to kind of just feel it and see it. And I don't get out much, guys. I don't get out much, and I'm not talking to people, but I'm getting a sense that there is a divide being created here, and it's just unnecessarily. It's a constant barrage of mainstream news talking about immigration crisis, where we're having a crisis, or we've got a crisis here in the UK. How the government haven't got control and have failed, and quite frankly, Britain's broken, and we're being taken over by Islam. I'm not going to defend any of this. It's information that millions of people are following and tracking. But all of this is just a sort of smoke screen, in my eyes. That is, guys. It's there, it's news, and that's it. But the purpose of this channel is a prepping channel, and I'm focusing on the reasons why we should be prepping, and I shouldn't be prepping because there's Palestinian protests, and that's just, that's not. I'm not interested in that. It's a smokescreen. There's people that are. That's why they're doing what they're doing, and I don't want to be wasting your time with that. But it's just giving everyone else something else to sort of focus on and sort of moan about. The real problems are sort of happening in other parts of the world. So if you're in the UK and Europe, then forget about all this immigration and free Palestine news, and just start focusing on making sure that you and your family are prepared if you need to be. Don't be distracted by all of this nonsense, because it is time consuming and energy sapping and all the rest of it. Okay, guys, I just wanted to sort of get that there for a minute. Moving on, I think it might be this one. Right. There are other factors we need to acknowledge, guys. The BRICS, if you haven't heard of it, BRICS, it's the BRICS Alliance. Shall I call it an alliance? I don't know. But BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Developed into, rather than an alliance, it's like an intergovernmental organization created by four of those main countries, with with their first, I think they had a summit probably 14, 15 years ago. Anyway, it's 2009. So then they've had a summit today as well. So again, that's why I'm talking about this today. This is all going to make sense and become relevant in a minute. There are now 11 BRICS members. So South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, or the United Arab Emirates. For any of you that don't know where that is, just think of Dubai. Have been added to that alliance. This will be seen as an Eastern alliance forming. And as I've been saying for months now, that World War III is a war that's going to be between the East and the West, or it is an East and the West. You're seeing these alliances all coming together now. And only this afternoon, I think I was hearing that Trump has issued another 10% tariffs on any BRICS member states. So the following 11 countries have just been hit with, I don't know what tariffs they've got against them at the moment, but they've just been hit with another 10 because they are a member of BRICS. Hence, so that's a clear indication for Trump, certainly, but for the West, that the BRICS alliance is becoming some kind of threat. However, Today is the BRICS summit in Brazil. I think that's where it is, with the two key members missing, that being Putin and Xi Jinping. But there's there's good reasons why Putin won't be there. Buzzing around Brazil with the rest of them. Xi Jinping, I'm not too sure why he's had a day off. But the BRICS alliance will be expanding to now include the following countries. So these are more countries that are going to join this alliance. We should be expecting to see Vietnam, Nigeria, Belarus, Bolivia, Cuba, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Thailand, Uganda, and Uzbekistan. I believe that's it. So they're going to be new members. When? I don't know, but they're kind of in the pipeline. Whilst that's may start to concern people, I'm just going to give you a rundown as to reason why that's not a concern for me. But it doesn't. For who am I? It doesn't matter. But I'm just going to run this down to. I'm just going to run these countries down. Okay. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Actually, let's just get rid of that. I'm going to just throw in this question in here and just leave that there. Right. What I'm going to do, let's start with India. I've been there a couple of times, but in terms of the country, India has corruption issues within government and human rights issues. But the one we're looking for is terrorism. It is a significant problem in India. Right. I'm just going to put problem in. Yeah. So, yeah, terrorism is a significant problem in India. Right. You'll get where I'm going with this in a minute. Certainly, when we include sort of one of its neighbours, if we're talking about Pakistan, who they were nearly at war with, probably only a month ago now. Then we've got Indonesia. Okay, so Indonesia is currently. Let me just throw that in there. It's currently facing both terrorism and conflict issues. The threat from Islamic extremists remains high, with terrorist groups actively sort of planning attacks and the Indonesian authorities actively working, to disrupt those efforts. But additionally, certain regions experience ongoing civil unrest and conflicts. They've got high air pollution, which is a big concern there, and many sort of natural disasters, including earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, even tsunamis, and not forgetting terrorism and also extremism. There's terrorist attacks often sort of target Indonesian government and law enforcement interests, places of worship, and Western interests. And now I'm just gonna. This is on their official site. This is Indonesia. So if you're traveling into Indonesia, this is what you've got to bear in mind. Potential targets for these terrorist attacks will include beach resorts, hotels, bars, restaurants, markets, attractions, foreign embassies, polling stations, ferry terminals, and airports. So if you're going on holiday, don't go on the beach. Be careful what hotels you're staying in and what bars, restaurants, and markets. Anyway, you know where I'm going with that. There's an increased risk during sort of holiday periods there in Indonesia. Heightened risk during Christmas, New Year, Easter, Chinese New Year, and Islamic celebrations. So all I'm saying is I'm just pointing that out to you. Okay, Brazil is slightly different. It's going to be slightly different because it's more criminal activity as opposed to terrorist related kind of things. But it's a lovely holiday destination. I've heard. I've not been. Depending on where you travel, of course. But Brazil has significant challenges in safety and security with high rates of crime, including theft, robbery, and gang violence, particularly in the urban areas. So socio-economic inequality is also a major issue, leading to stark differences in living conditions and limited access to, quality healthcare and sanitation, especially for the poor. But additionally, Brazil faces an economic sort of headwinds, including potential slowdowns in the economy growth or the economic growth and the fiscal instability. So I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of them. These are the guys that are all members of the new BRICS alliance. Yeah. Okay. So you'll guys, you'll understand why I'm mentioning this. Ethiopia, yeah. What does it say there? Yes, terrorism is a significant problem in Ethiopia. Both domestic and international terrorist groups pose threats to the country's security and stability. So it is a country whereby terrorism across the country is highly likely. There is ongoing civil war. And that's been going on, where are we, 2025? So since 2018, 7 years, with all sorts of power struggles at the moment. So the ongoing civil war with Sudan has forced millions of people to flee, and they're still, sort of dealing with internal health matters such as cholera, which has been since the no, not since the pandemic, anyway, 2022. So just after that, as well as other significant sort of health concerns for sort of, for the public right across the country. Ethiopia states on their official site, avoid non-essential travel to the country due to civil unrest. Okay, right. Let's move on to the next one. Egypt, intense corruption and poverty. If we look at, let's say, if you, well, there's terrorism is a significant problem in Egypt, particularly in the north. If we're talking about the pyramids, let's just talk about the pyramids. It's well known for its pyramids, but they have 14 million tourists visiting the pyramids every year. And when you go there, it's a shithole. They don't look after the place. So where is all that money going? The police and officials accept bribes, and there is a high threat of terrorist kidnappings in parts of Egypt. Moving on to, and I was surprised about this next one, or was I shouldn't have been, but I was expecting something slightly different, um, only because they're kind of quite close, quite pally with America or the US, Saudi Arabia. So an oil-rich country, but a kingdom of repression, and absolutely no regard for human rights, with reports of public executions. Saudi civil, I think it was the Political Rights Association founders, were all imprisoned for 10 years or a little bit more, a little bit less each, for peaceful protests. So for peaceful protests, they received a 10-year prison sentence. Non-Muslims, so any of you Christians out there, for any non-Muslims, or other, actually, not Christians, but any other faith, non-Muslims, are not allowed to worship in public or display religious items. So don't go walking around with a Bible under your arm and a crucifix around your neck. There is little to no justice in Saudi Arabia, apparently, within their justice system, and they don't have an official penal code. So women in Saudi face harsh restrictions and discrimination and punishment every day, as we hear about quite a lot. Having to ask permission for passports and work and signing contracts and getting married and things. Now, again, you get mixed vibes about this. This is the narrative that we've been sold for years as Westerners, but we hear online via other avenues that it's all changing, or it's not quite as we've been, it's not quite the same as what we've been told. I don't know, it doesn't matter. There have been nearly 600 executions there in sort of Saudi Arabia since 2014, with cases of execution for petty crime, for protesting, and also for showing too much skin. And on top of that, there are terrorist attacks. There's kidnappings. There's restrictions on public gatherings. They've got dependence on foreign labour, and unfair trials and torture. And of course, Saudi Arabia experiences significant corruption challenges. But then, to be honest with you guys, all governments are guilty of that. Even the British government. In fact, they're probably the worst. They're just the British government's just being run by a bunch of clowns. Anyway. They probably don't even know what corruption means. It's just, it's just some governments are going to be better than others at hiding it. That's all I'm saying. Now, again, I was actually surprised about this one. Let's just throw that in there. UAE, the United Arab Emirates. If you don't know where that is, just think of Dubai. Terrorist is a concern in the UAE. Again, we only our picture of The UAE is Dubai. That's all you see sort of advertised really, and nothing else. But when we talk about the UAE, there are crosswinds. What I'm going to call crosswinds there. It's a very small country, so it's not that much bigger. I think it's only just under twice the size of Israel. Um, it has Western influences, of course, but it's still governed by the same principles as its neighbours, such as human rights. The women are still restricted in, what they can and can't do. But guys, this is the Middle East. It's Middle Eastern culture. It's a culture that has, it has and it is still to this day ingrained into the very fabric of the regions, and it has been for years and years and years. But as we come to the end of these BRICS members, okay, this is the sort of membership you want, isn't it? I suppose, or this is the sort of group that you want to join. We have Russia, and we should have all sort of learned a little bit, hopefully, about Russia over the last couple of years, guys. A country that is at war, it's invaded its largest neighbour, that being Ukraine, and it's a country soon to. This is only my opinion, but it's soon to feel the full force of NATO. Another country with very little regard to well, let's say the human race, hardly any human rights and collapsing economy. And with that will come, sort of underperformances in, I don't know, the healthcare system and social connections, environmental quality, and I don't know, safety and life satisfaction. There's thousands of Russians fleeing that country to avoid these problems. But also to avoid being rounded up and sent to the front lines, because that's what's happening. Whether that's an official mobilization or not, people are being rounded up. Do you know there's less than one half of the population that has access to clean drinking water in Russia? I didn't know that either. Um, you learn something new doing these videos. It is a little bit of a history and a sort of a geography lesson mixed in with other stuff. Let's talk about South Africa just quickly. Putting aside the day-to-day issues, we can start with corruption, both in public and private sectors over there. But honestly, this is happening all over the world. That's what I've just said. So, there's no, you can't trust. Right, this is my view again. Sorry, I have to say that because it is my opinion. But anybody in high places just can't be trusted. Poverty, a more obvious issue, which brings with it high levels of crime, economic instability, poor education, and also inequality, coupled with what they call muted growth. So growth in sort of certain areas, controlled growth, and significant issues with electricity supply across the whole of South Africa. Moving on to this one, we've got to see what's happening with these guys. China. The country is being run and controlled by the CCP, or the Chinese Communist Party. So that says it all, really. It too has human rights issues, such as restrictions on freedom of speech, certainly. There's restrictions on religion as well. There were reports of mass detention, ethnic minorities, and forced labor. And we know that anyway for China. That's how, they keep that manufacturing engine moving and running and functioning. With very large, it's got a very large dose of significant air and water pollution, as we know, because quite frankly, they don't give a shit about climate change. Um, and that's it with them. I think that's all I'm going to do is cover them. But what I'm trying to, well, when I talk about these countries, I'm actually being a little bit unfair in that I'm just pouring out some of the bad parts, to these countries, which many countries across the globe are kind of going through and experiencing and orchestrating. And I'm, but, I'm not sort of counting with. I'm not counting in or sort of including any of the nice stuff about these countries. There's going to be nice parts to each of these countries, some very nice holiday destinations, business opportunities, and very nice people in the most part. Come to the UK though, you'll find that we're all a bunch of miserable fuckers, always talking about the weather and moaning about everything else. So that's it. I've sold it for you. But when we look at some of these issues, we can start to see patterns. So the reason why I just went through those different countries, those BRICS members, the patterns we're looking for, or see it, not looking for, is what we see is human rights. That's a problem. Okay, corruption, There's what else was there? Poverty, economic struggles, as well as the most important for this discussion today, certainly on the 7th of the 7th, is terrorism. So, in relation to BRICS, when people talk about it as an alliance or an intergovernmental organization or whatever you want to call it, just look at the optics. Look at the people or the member states that are joining. It's kind of like a group of corrupt criminals all sort of coming together to create their own gang sort of thing. But the empires, they're running at the moment, that being the very countries they govern, are broken. And we have to understand this potential enemy. But to be fair, the UK, the US, and many other sort of European countries are also broken. They're just not sort of saying it. Well, we are in the UK. People are starting to say, yeah, this country's done, it's finished. There are Eastern values at play within these governments that they've been around for hundreds of years, and they don't look like they're open to any change at the moment. So, do you know why this is? Because right now, the way they sort of maintain control over their population is through absolute fear. So these governments maintain control by intentionally fostering fear among their populations. So portraying this fear through forms of propaganda, crisis exploitation, scapegoating, and a fear of crime. That's causes erosion on civil liberties, which is increased surveillance. Certainly, if you go to places like China, North Korea, and places like that, you've got restrictions on freedoms, suppression of dissent. Um, and they will maintain such controls through self sort of censorship and social conformity. So they'll turn the internet on and then they'll turn it off, or you'll only be able to see this and you'll only be able to see that. So it's very restrictive. But the ethnic implications of this are going to be undermining sort of autonomy, moral implications, and other long-term effects. So, again, I live in the UK. A lot of this we don't sort of experience. However, it is all about controlling the masses through fear. Here in the UK, will be taxes, legislation, regulation, and many other factors. That's the similar sort of. Those are the more common sort of implications to you and I. So the West over the years has adopted social media, and governments use it as a primary tool for misinformation, misperception, deception, and fake news, because they know, and I've mentioned this plenty of times, that 85% of the people will follow and believe that crap. So as we move on quickly, so there's the whole purpose of this video is to talk about terrorism, and with that, who are the enemy? This is where I'm trying to get to with this. Right now, the enemy will be Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea. The West see these four as a collective, and they will be treated as such. And three out of the four, they've threatened the West with nukes. So if you threaten me and my family with a gun, let's say, for example, I'm not going to wait around for you to come around to me. I will make sure that I'm armed and I'm coming to you first. There's no sign that Russia is stopping, and Putin has said so himself. Iran have issued a fatwa against the world's most powerful leader and thinks that he's going to be allowed to get away with it. That's just not happening, guys. In fact, I think the Iranians have just made this whole conflict 100 times worse for the whole of the Middle East. That is like someone telling me that Bob down the road has just put a price or some kind of bounty on my head. So first and foremost, what am I going to do? Bob's fucking getting it, and I've got to make sure that I make an example of him and just warn the others off. So the Middle East hasn't seen anything yet, I don't believe. Things have escalated and kind of they're actually becoming personal. When you make a personal threat on somebody's life like that, you've got to kind of understand what implications that's going to have. We have the Houthis sinking cargo ships last night still, which is like, one of Bob's mates coming down the street and punching me in the side of the face and running off again, causing trouble, but not understanding the consequences is kind of where I'm going with that. See, in the West, in some countries, we've gone too far. We've gone the other way, giving people too many human rights. and are now running around sort of causing all sorts of problems. We can no longer challenge nor do anything about. It's about striking that balance, the balance that keeps both sides happy. So the government happy if they've got, if they sort of still have control, and then the people, happy if they're not being treated like caged animals. So, if you give them too much rope, though, and then they start sort of, they start getting confused on whether or not they're male or female, and others, even sort of transgender kids identifying as animals. So I don't really listen, guys. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I don't, I won't go down that rabbit hole, but I am going to just poke my head in quickly because I need to explain this just so we understand the people around us and kind of what we're talking about here. Um, I'm of a certain age, an age when I was sort of growing up, there were no mobile phones and no internet. So our socializing and amusement was, I suppose it was created out on the street in the real world, where as kids, we would fall out of trees and off the bikes, and going home with cuts, bruises, and scratches and all that. We were running around the streets at a very young age, safely, and everything we learnt on the street, we learnt from the very people that we spent time with. So mobile phones, to be honest, weren't a problem. The first phones that I'm talking about are the Nokia's, the Motorola Razr, and the Ericssons. Used to find out, you know, we would use those to find out where everybody else was, where to meet up, and it just saved us having to find change for the local phone box or asking mum and dad to use the phone. The internet, when it first hit the scene, was that was fine also, mainly being used for business and taking advantage of the dot-com bubble. However, when the first Apple iPhone came out, that was when I believe the fuse was lit. Combining the internet with mobile phones was one thing, but what really done it was social media. So if we go back to 2005, 2006, humans have been influenced massively online by others from across the world. And it's a combination of the internet, smartphones, and social media that's destroying our generations at the moment. Guys, this is only my opinion, but I hear it from many other parents and many other people out there. And it just brings me back to the kids of today, identifying as animals and getting confused about lots of other things. I'm blaming the internet for that. They're not getting that information from their mates on the street. It's just not happening. Well, they are now because they're all watching and reading the same content. And here we are, the West going too far with rights, allowing people to take their rights and to complete, they're taking them to completely different levels. But listen, none of that is important. What is important? Many of those confused individuals out there, they're going to receive a rude awakening. Can you imagine just losing access to the internet? The business impact would be devastating for many anyway. But also from a personal sort of perspective, if I get on a tube today or a bus, it's dead quiet, even though it's packed. No one is talking to anyone. There's couples sat next to each other. There are parents with their kids all sat there on their phones, and if you when you look up and down the carriage or whatever it is, it's quiet. No, everyone's on their phones and no one's talking to each other. If you took that newfound sort of virtual world away from them, can you imagine it? See, for me, my biggest concern with what's unfolding at the moment is, for me, is water and food. Whereas access to the internet would be devastating for these individuals. So we thought there was an uptick in mental health following the pandemic. Can you imagine the mental health issues off of the back of no internet access for, let's say, a month or more? Anxiety, depression, and just feeling completely isolated in the real world as opposed to lost in the virtual world. So it's a lose-lose situation for many of them out there. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is and this is kind of incorporating what people are reading and listening to and their views and opinions and stuff like that is based on what they're viewing and many other sort of factors. But let's not get into that. Right, I'm just going to finish off. In my view, society has become weak, very weak. Even Even in the year 2000, let's go back to 2000. So let's go back 25 years. If you was to ask me what percentage of people are likely to be normalcy bias, the percentage would have been a lot less than 85%. Whereas today, I believe it could be sat there at around 90% plus. And do you know why that is? Because let's face it, we have access to information in our hands now, right now, and would expect, or I would expect, everyone to be up to date with what's happening around the rest of the world. Nope, it's Facebook, Insta, TikTok, and a mountain of bullshit on this platform. Actually, taking precedence over the over the real world. See, none of them are living in the real world. And when talking about war, conflict, death, and chaos, that isn't the real world to them because they live in the virtual world. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's difficult to kind of understand where people are going, what they're thinking, and various other stuff. They're the influences that they've picked up from God knows where is. I'm concerned for a lot of people out there. Yeah, that's all I can say. Anyway, apologies for sort of going off track a little bit. Just 1 or 2 minutes, and then I'll finish off. But it's important to understand this. And depending on how old you are and the influence you have gained, sort of, let's say, from your parents, then you'll understand. I have mentioned in some of my videos the very first and second threat to you when the shit hits the fan is going to be what? The first one is you. You are the first threat. If you suffer from normalcy bias, then you are a danger to both yourself and anyone else you're responsible for. Ignorance will get you killed, as well as panic buying, and with that, being unprepared. If the shit hits the fan, that is, guys. The second most immediate threat, this is before we talk about panic buyers and no electricity and all the rest of it. Okay, your immediate threats straight away. The first one is somebody who's ignorant and oblivious or chooses to throw their head in the sand and just hope that it all goes away. But the second most immediate threat is going to be to those around you, or not to those around you. Those around you are going to be your second biggest threat. So that's going to be your neighbors, your work colleagues, family, friends, and so on. If they're not prepared and they're in the supermarket panic buying, then those very people, you faulting you, are now a direct threat to you. So understanding these threats is paramount. Understand yourself first. Only you know what you're about, what you believe in, your capabilities, your strengths, your weaknesses, and all the rest of it. It will be down to you if the shit hits the fan. And if you have kids and other people to look after, when the shit hits the fan, they're going to be expecting to look up to you for your support. They're going to be going to you, hopefully, if you're an adult. And now we've come to the part, just as we finish off here, that this video is all about the terrorist threat, the terrorism or the terrorist threat. You're going to have to be hyper vigilant, guys. People are changing. There are many different types of people around us, and we need to be aware of everything at the moment. Understand who you've got living next door to you. If the shit hits the fan, and they're the type of people, or they could be the type of people, it depends on whether they're prepping or not, but they could be the type of people that are coming through your front door and taking your supplies so they can feed their own kids. You're not likely to know the answer to this next question, but are any of your work colleagues member of sleeper cells and stuff like that? Basically, what I'm doing and the narrative I'm adopting now is everybody is a suspect. My behavior is not any different to them or with them. But they are potential suspects. It doesn't matter what they look like, where they come from, what they do. And because until I know, that's it. Are you going to make sure that you need to make sure, guys, that you haven't been invited to that dreaded panic buying party for starters? Are you going to make sure that when it goes tits up, that you can support those around you? Are you fit enough to walk a mile to the local sort of water source and collect water and so on, guys? These are just things that you need to be able to do. So, in summary, when these supreme leaders and Islamic clerics, raised the red flag of revenge and retribution 2 weeks ago, I think, in Iran, potentially activating revenge terrorist groups and militants, for the attacks on Iran over the last sort of 3 or 4 weeks. It is those leaders that are causing the divide between the people on the street, which is being further fueled, I would say, by other governments and mainstream news. The primary targets are America and Israel. But that doesn't stop there. There are American and Israeli targets here in the UK, and across the whole West, to be honest with you. So across Europe and everywhere. So unfortunately, you know, when what happened 20 years ago today happens again soon, which it could quite easily, there are going to be, yet more innocent people killed. Causing, further divide and potential violence on the streets of the UK, because the fuel is already being injected into the population. Just jump online, you see it. It's just protest after protest, but we're just getting this Islamic divide between, it's us and them. It's because I hate all of this religious bollocks, guys, because let's face it, there is a massive religious influence here. Any attacks on the West by Eastern terrorists is highly likely going to be carried out in the name of God. And what sort of God is telling you to go and revenge other human beings, unless it is Trump or unless you get the target? Unfortunately, when this stuff happens, it's innocent people that get it. You and I need to block this political and sort of religious bullshit out, guys, and just keep an eye on your preps just in case it all pops off in Europe. If you're in the UK and in Europe, that's all you really should be concentrating on. That's enough of my rubbish, guys. Certainly for one day. Get yourselves military fit, infantry wear, and I'll be back soon.